One thing that we as freshman algebra teachers wanted to do was to give you an example of how you might analyze a graph. And as you look at a graph, here are some things that are to consider. What are the topics of the graph? What quantities are being compared? So you'll be looking at the x and the y axes. And what do they really represent? What are some observations that you can make looking at the graphs? And one advantage to looking at a graph is to try to foresee or try to predict patterns and maybe look out 5 to 10 years with the data that you have and see if you can make some predictions. You might look for any upward or downward trends. And not only is it going upward or downward, but are there any sudden spikes in the graph? Are there any sudden changes? What are we comparing? And as I mentioned here, can you make any predictions? What are some things that what are some tendencies that you might notice by looking at the graph? So this graph that we have chosen to analyze here, to give you an example, is actually a very interesting and complicated graph because there are a number of different quantities here that we need to keep track of. First of all, it's color-coded, and you can see that this kind of a pink here is the bill of materials, and the gray is a retail cost, and these are associated with iPhones. Now, as you move through these years, you see 2007, 2008, 2009, and so that is marking the years, and then these are the model of the phones. And as I was looking at this graph, I think there's a few things that are very interesting to note. Notice that there was no model change in model here in 2012. So 2012, they haven't included any differences in phones here in 2012. Also notice that in 2016, there are two phones of different models, two model phones. And that also occurs in 2017. So at first glance, when you look at this, you might be tempted to say, oh, 2007, 2008, 2009, and that's certainly true, but there's a year missing here, and over here there are two phones, same year, and two different phones here in the same year. Now, notice that the pink, as I said before, is the bill of materials, so that's really a cost of materials. The gray is the retail cost. That's the price of the iPhone in a store. Now you can see that this is a little over $200 and this is about $500. Here you have below $200 and here you have $600. I think one observation is that from 2008, 2000, 2009, and 2010 is that the selling price really stayed pretty constant here at $600. It looks very, very close to $600. Here there's a slight increase, a little bit of a decrease here. I wouldn't say that that was a spike. Here, it's a significant change. You could argue that these are a drop here, a significant drop. But I think if you're really looking for a significant change, this certainly warrants a significant change. Drop here from 2015 to the SE model in 2016. And then there is a significant difference between these two. However, if you just compare from 15 to 16 of the 6S and the 7, you can see that that's really not, there's no change here at all. From the 7 to the 8, a little bit of a jump, but I think you could very easily argue that this is a spike here. A spike is a significant change. And then for 17 and 18, the Model X and XS, these have a selling price of $1,000 here. Now, there is another quantity that is being measured here, and we don't often see this in a graph, but it's an interesting thing to track in relation to the cost of the materials and the retail cost. And it is called the profit margin. And you can see here the profit margin, and this is on the right axis. So we're looking at it from this point of view, way over here on the right edge. And this is a measure of the percentages. Now, that is this little line here that is tracking above the pink and the gray. Now, how is that profit margin calculated? Well, the easiest way to calculate, or an example for that, is to look at this last column here with these two amounts. This is showing that the excess is selling for $1,000, but the cost is $400. The materials cost is $400. So from $1,000 retail cost to the cost of materials, that is a difference here of $600. Now, if you take $600 difference and you divide that by 1,000, you will get 60%. $600 difference compared to the $1,000 selling price, you get 0.60, which would be 60%. So with this percentages here, and that line that is following the years and the models here, that line is a measure of what we call the profit margin. And it is the difference between the retail cost and the bill of the materials. It's that difference compared to the retail cost. Now, the graph here, notice what it says, is while the prices of iPhones have soared, Apple's profit margins from the devices haven't followed. And you can see how the profit margin was here almost up to 80%. And then it has dropped off, leveled off, dropped, and then really leveled off. So even though phones are getting much more expensive, the profit margin really has stayed right around here about 60%. Now, predicting into the future, I think you could make a couple predictions. You could say one is that phones are really getting more expensive. I think you could also say that the profit margin probably will stay around 60%.